expansion. That's actually a cement factory that they're building over there. They're going to create all the cement that they're going to need right on the location. And they're just clearing away the land and starting to build that plant now. You'll get a much better view of that as we come out into the lake and turn to the left a little bit.
At the time it was built, Gatun Lake was the largest man-made lake in the entire world. However, today Gatun Lake doesn't even make the top 30 list of man-made bodies of water. It does have an area of 164 square miles when it's at its normal level, and the lake stores 4.2 million acres of feet of water, which is about as much water as comes down the shelters for the majority of average year. Which means empty Gatun Lake, it would take an average year's rainfall to refill the lake, which gives you some idea of the enormous amount of rain that falls in this area of Panama. So on this side of Panama, the usual forecast is rainy and windier because they do get a lot of rain. About 85 feet deep, but as part of the canal expansion program with the new locks, of course the canal will require more water, so Gatun Lake needs to be increased. Well, one way would to be raise the dam, of course, but oops, then the existing locks would be 8 feet underwater, so you can't do that. So they're going to increase the water in Gatun Lake by actually deepening the lake. Those of you who like to fish should also take note that during the U.S. canal days, Gatun Lake was stocked with peacock bass. And this lake proved to be an ideal environment, and the fish really thrived. So today, there is a large population of peacock bass in this lake. Now, what you see ahead of you as islands in Gatun Lake today are actually the tops of mountains that used to be here before the lake was flooded. So these are actually the top of mountains. Many of these islands have really been pretty much undisturbed for almost 100 years because of the canal's policy, both during the U.S. canal days and today with the country of Panama actually running the show of the canal, that all of the area around the canal needs to be preserved. And it's protected area to protect the rainforest and the watershed that provide the fresh water necessary to operate the canal. So you will not find buildings on these islands because this is all protected area. Now, there is one island that's very interesting. We won't see it, but we do want to tell you about it, and that's the Barro, Colorado, which is home to the research center of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and it's locally called the STRI. And the reason this is interesting is because it provides a unique opportunity for long-term eco studies in the tropics, and it's used very extensively by some 900 visiting scientists from academic and research institutions in the U.S. and around the world every year. And one of the reasons it's so interesting to them is because at the time they flooded the lake, whatever was on that island in terms of insects or snakes, or they're still there. So it's like a time capsule that they can study almost 100 years now.
folks, if you were transiting the entire canal in the ship, you would actually be going straight ahead, not turning to the left or the right. The main channel is dead ahead of us, actually just a little bit to the left of that major island in front of us, which, as Barb mentioned, is actually the top of a mountain. For those of you on the right side of the ship, you can see much more clearly now Gatun Dam and the generating station that's obviously attached to it. So you're probably wondering who are the biggest customers of the canal. Well, there's actually four. There's obviously the container ships, which we've seen today. There's the bulk carriers, which if you look over to your left, you'll see some of them. There's also tankers, and there's a couple of tankers there, and they could be hauling either dry or liquid goods. And then there's the car carriers, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is that orange boxy looking ship off the port beam there. Cruise ships actually only account for 2% of the canal's usage. So cruise ships are a small portion of the revenue that's generated by the canal. It's more in that order: containers, bulk, tankers, and car carriers. We mentioned earlier, you'll notice that the water is quite brown. That's because of all the runoff that's throughout November, even now into January. With a beautiful sunny day. I have to tell you, last week it was pouring rain. People were out with umbrellas standing outside trying to see the canal. So you really lucked out for a beautiful morning to transit. One of the interesting industries that's now been started in Gatun Lake is an unusual one, and that would be forestry. Yep, forestry. They're actually starting to forest some of the trees that were covered by the water when they flooded Gatun Lake, because when they flooded this area, they didn't take anything down, they just simply let the water come in. So an American and a Canadian company have now negotiated contracts with some of the indigenous people to actually start to harvest some of the wood that is still standing in forests underneath the lake. And it's a quite a complicated way to get the wood from the bottom. First of all, they have to anchor the wood, because if you take a chainsaw underwater and cut it off, you now have a wooden missile coming up. So you have to make sure that it's not going to come flying up at you. So they actually have to be very careful in how they mine or forest these beautiful logs that these trees have been there over 100 years now. So it's a beautiful honey-colored wood with grain that you just can't find today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is an announcement from the tour office for those passengers who are booked on Princess Organized Tours today in Panama. This morning we will be calling you in group order to meet in the Princess Theatre on deck 7 forward once the ship is securely anchored in the Gatun Lake, and you will be tendered ashore in groups to meet your tour buses. This morning we are slightly ahead of schedule and anticipate that we will call the first group in 15 minutes time. Please listen out for further announcement. Once again, this is for those passengers who are booked on Princess Tours today in Panama. We will be calling you in group order to meet in the Princess Theatre on deck 7 forward. Once the ship is securely anchored, you will be taken ashore in groups to meet your tour buses. We anticipate that we will be calling the first group in around 15 minutes time.